The third way that we can solve a quadratic equation is with something called the quadratic formula. Okay, you may have seen that before. Remember, a quadratic equation is one where we have an x squared, a plain x, and then our constant. So ax squared, a is the number in front of the x squared, plus bx, b is the number in front of the regular x, and then c is our constant. Typically, we want quadratic equations to start out equaling 0, okay? If we're going to use the factoring method, we need them to be set equal to 0. If we're going to use the square roots method, usually we're going to try to isolate x squared, so they may start out equal to 0, but you're going to move stuff away so that you can get x squared by itself. In the quadratic formula method, we are going to want it to equal 0. So you're going to want to make sure everything is on the left-hand side equal to 0, okay? Notice how we've always been calling this number in front of x squared, we've always been calling it a. The number in front of the plain x, we've been calling it b. And then we've been calling our plain number, our constant there at the end, we've been calling that c. The quadratic formula is this formula right here, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Okay? The a, b, and c in this formula are the a, the b, and the c from when our quadratic equation is written out in this way. So everywhere you see an a in this formula, you would put the number in front of the x squared. Everywhere you see a b in this formula, you would put the number in front of the plain x. And everywhere you see a c in this formula, you would put the constant. Okay? And I can't believe I'm about to sing this on video, okay? It's hard enough to sing live in front of people, but on a video that you can hear over and over. But here we go. There's a little song to the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat that you can remember the quadratic formula. Okay, so I'll sing it, and you can sing along. It'll be good times, okay? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so that's the little formula for quadratic formula. For how we can use it. Okay, so here's a quadratic formula, or I'm sorry, quadratic equation. We are asked to solve it. Remember, all quadratic equations have two solutions. There are two different numbers that we could plug in for x that would make this equation come true. This one actually we could factor, okay? But sometimes people struggle with factoring, and that's not maybe always real easy for them. So the quadratic formula is a way that you can solve it. If you're not as good at factoring, if that's a strength, if that's not a strength for you, you can use quadratic formula instead. Or sometimes the quadratics do not factor. This one does, but some of the other ones later do not factor. So quadratic formula is another way that you can solve it. Okay, so in this case, the number in front of x squared is 2. So in this case, a is 2. The number in front of the plain x is b. So b is negative 5. And c is negative 3. So using 2 for a, negative 5 for b, and negative 3 for c, I'm going to plug those numbers into this formula. And whatever it comes out for x, those are the values of x that would work in this equation. So x equals negative b. B is negative 5, so negative b is positive 5. Okay, think about that carefully. B is negative 5. So when I put negative 5 in for b, negative 5 is positive 5. So that's why I'm writing a 5 here. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, b is negative 5. Square it, because b squared, minus 4 times a is 2, times c is negative 3. So I've replaced this negative b with 5, this b and b squared with negative 5, so negative 5 squared, minus 4 times a was 2, and c was negative 3. All divided by 2 times a, and a we said was 2. So I have rewritten this formula by plugging in my a, b, and c numbers. Okay. Now, my suggestion, there are people that like to type this whole thing in their calculator all at once. I do not recommend that. For one thing, sometimes imaginary numbers come up and the calculator does not like it. If there's an imaginary number, you're going to get an error message. Okay. So my suggestion is to keep the 5 plus or minus square root divided by, and of course I can go ahead and work out the bottom. 2 times 2 is 4, so 4 is going to be on the bottom. My suggestion is type in only the part under the radical. I'm not even going to type the square root symbol. I'm going to put parentheses negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. Notice the reason I put the 2 in parentheses and the negative 3 is parentheses is because both A and C are being multiplied by 4. So I'm putting parentheses around the A value of 2, parentheses around the C value of negative 3. And I'm going to type that in my calculator. I did not type the square root. Did you notice that? I just typed a negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. And I got 49. Okay, 49 is the number under the radical. I did not type the square root symbol. Okay, now I can keep working this out. 5 plus or minus 40, square root of 49. Square root of 49 is 7. And then that's getting divided by 4. Okay, at this point, the reason there's a plus minus is because that's how you get your 2 answers. Remember, quadratic equations always have 2 answers. One answer is going to come from working this out with the plus symbol. The other answer is going to come from working this out with the minus. Okay, so I'm going to have 5 plus 7 divided by 4. And my other answer will be 5 minus 7 divided by 4. Well, 5 plus 7 is 12. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 4 is negative 1/2. So the 2 answers to this quadratic equation are 3 and negative 1/2. Those are my 2 answers. If you want to plug them in, 2 times 3 squared minus 5 times 3 minus 3. I typed in the original equation, but everywhere there was an x, I put a 3. And it works out to be 0 because that's the correct solution. Okay, I can type it again using negative 1/2. So 2 times negative 1/2 squared minus 5 times negative 1/2 minus 3. And I also get 0 because these are the 2 solutions to this equation. Okay. I mentioned a while ago I could have factored this one. This one would have factored to x minus 3 and 2x plus 1. So I could have factored it and then set each factor equal to 0. I would have got a positive 3 and a negative 1/2. But sometimes people struggle with factoring. So quadratic formula always works. Okay. Sometimes they don't factor. For instance, this one won't factor. So I don't have that option of using factoring. I have to use quadratic formula. Okay? All right, so let's try another one. Again, quadratic equation here. Our A value is 1. Our B value is negative 2. And our C value is negative 5. I'm going to plug these values into this formula. Okay? X equals negative B. Well, B is negative 2. So negative B means the opposite of negative 2, just 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, b is negative 2, so negative 2 squared minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 5. All over 2 times a is 1. So I rewrote this formula, but I plugged in 1 for all the a's, negative 2 for all the b's, and negative 5 for all the c's. So 2 plus or minus square root of whatever that works out to be, divided by 2 times 1. 2 times 1 is 2. All right, in my calculator, I'm going to just type the part under the radical. I'm not going to type the square root symbol. Negative 2 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. I'm just typing the part under the radical, and it comes out to be 24. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 24 divided by 2. Okay, simplify the radical. Square root of 24 is not a whole number. So I'm going to take 24 and I'm going to see what's in it. Well, 24 is 4 times 6. 4 is 2 times 2. 6 is 2 times 3. I've got a pair of 2's. So a 2 can come out of the radical. And the other 2 times 3, which is 6, has to stay in. Divided by, there's a 2 on the bottom. Okay. So this one's not imaginary, but it is what we call irrational. That square root of 6 is not going to come out to be a nice, neat, pretty whole number. All right. So one of my answers is 2 plus 2 square root of 6 divided by 2. And the other answer is 2 minus 2 square root of 6 divided by 2. Okay. Notice that in this case, both the 2 and the 2 square root of 6 are divisible by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 here is also 1. So I've got 1 plus square root of 6. Okay. That's one of our answers. The other answer is 2 minus 2 square root of 6 divided by 2. Both of these parts are getting divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 minus 2 square root of 6 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1 minus 1 square root of 6 again. So our two answers, here's an answer, here's an answer. 1 plus the square root of 6, and our other answer is 1 minus the square root of 6. Those are our two answers that we get. That's our solution set right there. I encourage you to pause the video as needed, rewind, excuse me, I got tongue-tied there, rewind as needed, practice them on your own, make sure you're comfortable with how to work these, okay? All right, another quadratic here. I know it's a quadratic, it's got an x squared, so I know there's going to be two solutions. Remember, we always like them to be in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 format. So if you'll notice, our bx, the 3x, is on the wrong side. It needs to be on the left. And our 1's on the wrong side. It needs to be on the left, and we need to have a 0 over here. So I'm going to minus 3x on both sides. So 5x squared minus 3x equals negative 1. I'm going to add a 1 to both sides. So 5x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0. Now it's set equal to 0. Our a value will be 5. Our b value is negative 3. Our c value is 1. And I'm going to plug that into my quadratic formula. Remember, quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I'm going to plug these values into that formula. So x equals negative b. Well, b is negative 3, so negative 3 is just positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 divided by 2 times 5. So 3 plus or minus the square root of whatever this is divided by 10, because 2 times 5 is 10. All right, in my calculator, negative 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 is negative 11. So under the radical is a negative 11. Okay. Well, I've got a negative number under a radical. That means this is imaginary. So my answer is going to be 3 plus, the I can come out, but 11 is not a perfect square. It doesn't have any buddies in there to come out. So 3 plus I square root of 11 over 10. And then the other answer will be 3 minus I square root 11 over 10. So once with the plus and once with the minus. Nothing comes out of the root 11. Nothing cancels with the 10. So there's our answers right there. Okay, there's our solution set. Okay, number 4, we are going to need to set it up in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 format. So that means I'm going to have to do some distributing here. X squared minus 4x equals 6x minus 27. I need it equal to 0, so I'm going to minus 6x on both sides. X squared minus 10x, negative 4x, negative 6x is negative 10x, equals negative 27. I'm going to add a 27 on both sides so that I can have it equal to 0. X squared minus 10x plus 27 equals 0. Now it's set equal to 0. It looks like the way that I need it. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. My a value is going to be the number in front of x squared, which in this case is a 1. The b will be negative 10. And the c will be 27. I'm going to plug 1 for a, negative 10 for b, c for 27 in this equation up here. So x equals negative b, so in this case it would be a plus 10, plus or minus the square root of negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 27, all over 2 times 1. So 10 plus or minus the square root of whatever that works out to be, divided by, in this case, 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so in my calculator, negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 27 is negative 8. Okay. Notice, this is a negative number under the radical. We can't take square roots of negative numbers. That means this is going to be an imaginary value. All right, so if I take 8, 8 is 4 times 2. So it's really 3 2's. When I get the prime factorization, a 2 will come out. Okay, so from right here, I'm going to take this up to the top here. X equals 10 plus or minus. A 2 can come out of the radical. And I will be written to indicate that it's imaginary, that we were taking the square root of a negative number. And this last 2 has to stay inside. Okay, the last 2 did not have a buddy. It stayed in the radical. Divided by 2. Okay, notice 10 can get divided by 2, and 2I root 2 can get divided by 2. So if I take my 10 over 2, I'm sorry, I wrote 5, 10 over 2 plus or minus 2I root 2 over 2. Well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay, so 10 divided by 2, that's 5, yeah. And then 2I root 2 divided by 2. This 2 is under a radical, and this one's not, so they don't cancel. But the 2 outside the radical and the 2 below can cancel. So 2 divided by 2 is 1 and leaves just the I root 2. So one of my answers is 5 plus I root 2, and the other answer is 5 minus I root 2. And there are the 2 solutions to this quadratic equation. Okay. Number 5, similar start to that one. I've got to distribute first. W squared minus 2W equals negative 5. I need to set it equal to 0, so I'll add 5 to both sides. W squared minus 2W plus 5 equals 0. Okay. It's set equal to 0. My A value is 1. My B value is negative 2. My C value is 5, and I can plug those into my formula. X equals negative B, so in this case, opposite or negative of negative 2 is 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Sorry about the telephone ringing, but we're all trapped at home with the COVID-19 crisis, so we'll just have to let that ring. All right, so x equals 2 plus or minus square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. Negative 16 divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Again, a negative number under a radical. That means it's going to be imaginary. So 2 plus or minus, square root of 16 is 4, but we're putting the I to show that it was imaginary, divided by 2. Again, both of these parts can get divided by 2, so we're going to split it up. 2 over 2 plus or minus 4I over 2. 2 over 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then the I is still there. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4I divided by 2 is 2I. So our answers are 1 plus 2I and 1 minus 2I. Those are the 2 solutions to this original quadratic equation. And then our last one here, again, it's a quadratic equation. We have a z squared. But remember, we want them set equal to 0. So I'm going to add a 6z to both sides. So z squared plus 6z equals negative 20. And I'm going to add a 20 to both sides because I need this equation set equal to 0. So z squared plus 6z plus 20 equals 0. Okay. I do not think this one will factor. I don't think there's anything that multiplies together to be 20 that will add or subtract to make a 6. So this is why we need quadratic formula, okay? But if you struggle with factoring, that's another reason to use quadratic formulas. And quadratic formula always works. Our A value is going to be 1, for the 1 in front of z squared. Our B value is a 6, and our C value is a 20. Plug those into quadratic formula. Notice, remember our formula is x equals negative b. So far, our b values have always worked out to be negative numbers. Like this here, the b was negative 10, so when we plugged in a negative b, we had a plus 10. Here's a time where our formula is negative b, but since our b is positive, opposite of b, or negative b, is going to be negative 6. Here's the first time I think we've had a negative value at the front there. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 20. Make sure that radical goes all the way to the end. Divided by 2 times 1. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of whatever that is, divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 20. That's negative 44. So we have a negative 44 under the radical. Negatives under the radical mean our answer is going to be imaginary. We're going to have, can't take the square root of a negative, so it's going to be an imaginary value here. So negative 6 plus or minus, let's see what can come out of root 44. Well, 44 is 4 times 11. 4 is 2 times 2, so a 2 can come out. And I will be written there to indicate that it's imaginary. And then still under the radical will be the 11. Okay, 11 did not have a buddy to come out with. Divided by 2. Notice 6 can get divided by 2, and the 2i root 11 can get divided by 2. So negative 6 over 2 plus or minus 2i root 11 over 2. Both parts are getting divided by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. 2i root 11 divided by 2. 2's cancel and leave I root 11. So one of our answers is negative 3 plus I root 11. The other answer is negative 3 minus I root 11. Those are the two answers to this quadratic equation. If you wanted to plug them in the original for a check, you could, and they would work. All right, thanks for working on the quadratics. Sorry that video was a little bit long.